It's my pleasure today to have a few words of exchanges with my dear old colleague Professor Vendhan. So, we were not only colleagues, I was also a student under him while I was doing my PhD, and we have come to know each other very well. So, with this brief introduction, I would like to get this interview going. I would like to have a conversation with Professor Vendhan. Morning, Professor Vendhan.
Good morning.
So, this heritage series is supposed to bring out something interesting for the viewers with regard to your own work and background, your interests, your experiences at IIT Madras. So, I should start by asking, please tell us a little bit of your background from the school days on to graduation and how you reached IIT Madras.
Okay, schooling, there is nothing much. I come from a village school, but then I had my bachelor's and master's in engineering from the Anna University, College of Engineering, Guindy. When I finished my master's in 1970, I joined IIT Kanpur for my PhD. And then when I finished 1975, I went away to United States as a postdoctoral fellow, University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Massachusetts. I would say, looking back, my career at IIT Kanpur as a student, probably one of the best in the sense that I've learned a lot, and the academic freedom that I enjoyed there, I still cherish that. In fact, I often repeat to my colleagues here, former colleagues here, about that environment as it is. So, that way I would say that in my student career, that was probably the best, the golden period. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to visit the University of Massachusetts as a postdoctoral fellow, and all my education has been in the field of structural mechanics, you can say. Even my postdoctoral work was in the field of structural mechanics. Although I had some, I used to peep into other topics, but this was primarily in the field of structural mechanics. By the time I finished my postdoctoral work in 1979 October, I did not want to settle down in the USA. I wanted to make a career in India. So, I convinced my wife, who happens to be a doctor, and we already had a 2-year-old daughter at that time. I convinced my wife that we will go back to India and then make a career. So, we landed in Chennai towards the last week of October. Wife and daughter and me unemployed, and then I was sure that I will find some job. So, we settled down here. Fortunately, our father-in-law's house was there in the place where I am living now, nearby. So, they were taking care of us. I went around. Obviously, the first visit was to IIT Madras. I went to different departments looking for some faculty opportunity. Then somebody suggested I should meet the director, Professor Indiresan. In fact, they gave very nice account of him, radical change from the previous directors. And so, one day I dropped in there, and he was kind enough to see me without appointment. And so, I went into his room. He made me comfortable, and it was a stroke of luck. Professor V.S. Raju was sitting there at that time. So, he told him, of course, I briefed as to what I have been doing and what I did in the United States. Then he told Professor Raju, here is a young man, why don't you try him out in your department. Obviously, we cannot hold a contract position like now, where they can offer a faculty position. Instead, they said, we will consider you for a research associateship, you put in an application. So, I did that. Meanwhile, I also had an interview at BHEL R&D in Hyderabad. There was an advertisement, and a friend of mine who worked there suggested that I apply. So, I attended that interview. All this happened sometime in November, both the IITM application for research associateship and the BHEL job. And sometime late December 1979, I got both the appointment orders, one from BHEL R&D for a deputy manager with a basic pay of 1450 rupees 1450. That was a permanent job, of course. And IIT Madras offered me 1,400 per month consolidated research associateship. Of course, it's considered to be a temporary slot. I didn't have much hesitation in deciding where to go, because my heart was on an academic career where I can do research and teaching. So, I immediately told my wife I am joining IIT Madras. Of course, she probably would have felt happy because she can stay on in Chennai and perhaps expand her medical practice. So, that is how I came here and I joined IIT Madras. And fortunately, there were a couple of faculty whom I knew, like Professor Ganapati, and so that way I was not a total stranger there. Professor Raju put me on the wave, not wave energy project, the ocean thermal energy project. So, he said that we will form a group and you will be coordinating it. And I also started doing something on the floating systems for the ocean thermal energy. So, that is how my career with IIT Madras started. And eventually, there was a faculty advertisement, and then in September 1980, I was selected as an assistant professor, and I joined formally as a faculty member. So, that is about my entry into IIT Madras.
So, on a lighter note, possibly your wife did not mind missing that ₹50 extra you would have got at BHEL compared to the salary that I had.
No, at that time we didn't. After all, we have come back from US, so you have some greenbacks. So money is the last thing in your mind. No? So that way, but anyway, my aim was to settle down in an academic career, and so I didn't have second thoughts before taking up this job, although it was only temporary, because I was sure that I'll somewhere get an appointment in the academic career.
I think on the more serious side, I would say that you were simply driven by the passion.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, in fact, my postdoctoral work was in the field of structural mechanics, where I did some work in the field of elasticity, and I also guided 2 MS students and closely associated with a PhD student. So, that I already had a research guidance experience, so to say, informally there. So, that way I was looking for a continuation of that career. So, that is how I ended up here.
As I just said, I know it is the passion in you that has made you to take on many works. I will come to that later. So, just now I will just pick on one thing. You said you enjoyed your days in IIT Kanpur the best, and I remember you telling time and again during our interactions much later how you used to take your assignments on term papers, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
for
right.
Courses.
IIT Kanpur, at least in those days, I don't know about it now.
Yeah.
They had a good, many of the important courses like the finite element analysis, then nonlinear vibrations course which I took, and also I did a course on stochastic problems which was taught by Professor N.C. Nigam, who retired as Delhi IIT Delhi director eventually. He also has a book on random vibrations, and he also taught Professor Narayanan. He was his PhD guide. So, all these courses had term papers, and I took it very seriously. For example, I did a very good term paper, Professor Nigam liked it, on stochastic problems. Then for the nonlinear vibration problems, out of my own interest, I worked on a very serious problem on nonlinear vibrations of plates, and that was eventually published in as a full paper in the AIAA, that is Aeronautical and Astronautical Institute of America. It was published as a paper. Even as I was a student, and I was supposed to be working in the field of nonlinear dynamics of shells. That was supposed to be my topic right from the beginning, and I had almost spent 2 years by the time I finished this job. So, then it occurred to me that I will switch over to this nonlinear vibrations as my PhD topic, and from then on I took another 2.5 years to complete my PhD. So, I continued my work in that field, and then I finished my
So, you also in a way went on to work in fluid dynamics, although structural mechanics was your
in fact, when I joined in IIT Madras in the Ocean Engineering Center at that time, it is well known that ocean engineering was emerging as an interdisciplinary area, and it is a combination of structural engineering, foundation engineering, fluid dynamics or hydrodynamics, then naval architecture. It is not merely a combination of people having expertise in each of these fields. Actually, every one of them should have some basic knowledge of each of these sub-disciplines. So, quite early in my career there, I realized that I should learn enough of each of these disciplines.
Yeah.
And although I was only a structural mechanics man, that is how I started very seriously. And an interesting thing happened at that time. One of our colleagues at that time who was teaching hydrodynamics, in fact, most of the colleagues were from the erstwhile civil engineering department there. Some are of course from outside. They were teaching, for example, Professor Raju and Professor Ganapati came from civil engineering. One in foundation engineering, other in structures.
Yeah.
So, like that we had a colleague who was teaching wave hydrodynamics at that time. So, he resigned the job, went away to Kuwait, and for some reason Professor Raju called me and said, you teach that course.
Yeah.
I said, okay. I mean the traditional response would be, no, I am a structural mechanics man, I cannot teach fluid dynamics. Since I realized that I should learn enough of fluid mechanics, I said yes, and then I started learning. In fact, if one has good applied math background, switching over is not a problem.
Absolutely.
And moreover, as civil engineers, we did study hydraulics. So, that was not out of my memory. So, I took it very seriously, and then I started learning. And then I went through a lot of important references in that. And again, another stroke of luck, just at that time, that was in the early 80s, I would say, one gentleman dropped into my room from ISRO and said that, sir, we want to do you to do a project on slosh dynamics. I said, I am basically a structural mechanics man. No, sir, somebody said that there is one youngster who has come from United States. You try him, because the people in the aeronautics department said, no, we cannot do it. We are not working in that area, we will not do it. And they went to even Kanpur IIT, and there also people said, no, we are not working in this area, we cannot do it. When he came and talked to me, I said, okay, I will do it, because just then I was learning fluid dynamics, and I said, I will do it. And then they wanted to develop in finite element based slosh dynamics. Since I had background in finite element, I readily agreed, and that is how I became deeply involved in fluid dynamic problems, and eventually it became a fluid structure interaction that has become my mainstay almost the entire career. I was pursuing that with my earlier strength in structural mechanics, and the one which I acquired during my career in ocean engineering department in fluid mechanics, it became a career in fluid structure interaction.
Great.
That is how it happened actually.
So, can I also correctly state that your development those days with regard to this sloshing problem was adopted as a code there successfully in the space program?
No, it was ironical. They came to me, they had in-house code on two-dimensional analysis.
Right.
And since the launch vehicles go in fact, they were developing the PSLV launch vehicle at that time. No? So, they these vehicles will go at an attitude angle. They said they should do a three-dimensional modeling. That is how they came to me. I did not know the implications of that, but I knew that I can develop a three-dimensional thing. So, I developed this three-dimensional thing, and in those days data preparation etc. was a big pain in the finite element,
yes.
but they did use my code actually.
Yes.
And then after a year of interaction, I forgot about them, and they also forgot about me. But then we still had a good interaction, because one of the major projects we handled for PSLV was in the structural analysis part.
Okay.
PSLV second stage, first stage, and the fourth stage. They had requirement for buckling, vibration, and stress analysis.
Right.
And I had an excellent partner in my colleague I should say former colleague in the applied mechanics department, composite center, Professor R. Padaninathan. So, I knew him before from my Kanpur days.
I know you used to go almost like brothers around.
People from IIT Madras in those days used to visit PhD students, visit IIT Kanpur, because we had IBM 7044, considered to be the biggest in the Southeast Asia for their computation. And at that time, I of course came in contact with him, and we are friends actually. That's how I came back and refreshed. In fact, ironically, I should also mention the man who introduced us to PSLV projects is none other than Nambi Narayanan. And he met us in their guest house in the Poise Garden. They had a guest house at that time.
Yeah.
I don't know how he caught our names. He invited us there, both I and Professor Pandinathan met him there. He said, we are now developing the PSLV technology, because just then they finished successfully the ASLV project. And he said that we have a requirement for this stress analysis, buckling, etc. And in those days, there were no package programs of the kind that we have today. They had their in-house program, and we also want somebody else to develop parallelly so that it will reinforce the project. And someday, when the rocket flies, I want somebody in Chennai to point to that. I've been a part of that.
No, the more important thing is you have given a very intrinsic contribution. You know,
and we said yes, and that is how it started.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I never had an opportunity to meet him again.
Yeah.
And there was a big turmoil, and then now he has come out of that.
Correct.
Probably when I happen to be in Trivandrum, I will try to meet him and then probably recollect and recapitulate this early thing. That was only one single meeting.
Yeah.
After that, the other people met us, and eventually this slosh dynamic thing also came in as it is. And to end that slosh dynamic story, year 2010, I retired formally at the age of 65, 2010 May. And then I was fortunate to get an appointment as a emeritus professor, a 3-year contract first and then a 2-year contract eventually. And somebody from, in fact, I would say that almost everybody except from some older people have retired from ISRO at that time, who were associating with me in that slosh project. No? They have retired.
Yeah.
And some youngsters came here, and then they met Professor Kishan Kuti, who is a professor. He is also my former student, PhD student. They met him and said that we want somebody to develop two-dimensional finite element model, an exclusive model for our slosh dynamics, with some additional analysis requirements.
Yeah.
And then they said, he said that, oh, Professor Vendhan, who did your 3D work in the mid-80s, is still around. So they came to me. So I've been part of that project. So I completed that, and in fact, they are using it for their PSLV, GSLV. They were very happy with that. And I'm still continuing. There are remnants of that project in an informal manner. I'm still continuing. So that is, I'll say, one of the most satisfying interaction with ISRO, where they were able to do that actually.
I know Krishnan Kuti used to say that he is officially the coordinator, but you are doing all the work. In his modesty, of course.
It is usually like that, very often. For example, even the project we jointly did for DST, on the small water plane twin hull thing. You were doing the work, and I was officially the coordinator. But then that gave me an opportunity to learn floating body dynamics and all that. So, in fact, I was not merely pepperhead, so to say. I was learning floating body dynamics and naval architecture. So that was an opportunity.
No, but in all honesty, I must also say that when I picked my PhD problem, possibly barely consulting you, I forayed into the strap down accelerometers and deriving the motions, which of course led to so many equations to be solved to understand. And I used to go around in this institute to other departments because you were on sabbatical or on leave at that time in USA. So I used to.
No, I went away to Canada on earned leave.
I was very brave, but I was not sure if this doesn't work, what do I do? But there I have to say, you gave me a beautiful analytical insight into the basic problem of resolving that initial value problem.
Basically I learned it on the job. I never did that before. Actually.
So what I would like to highlight here right now, I know you will be too humble to state it, but I would like to state that with your clarity of thinking, that analytical thinking, one thing we used to see in the department, faculty or students, research scholars across all faculty used to make a beeline to you to resolve their problems.
No, in fact, my early days as a research guide in ocean engineering was not without any thorns. So all my students used to work on numerical modeling and theoretical problems.
Yep.
And traditionally, in fact, I would say that although I may say it at the end, but I will say it now, IIT Madras was an extremely orthodox setup academically and socially also. And over the years it has changed. For example, I would say that Professor Indriyasan made a break.
Right.
And a drastic improvement came about during the time of Professor Ananth, the liberal thinking. He is the one who used to think very liberally in an academic and a social sense. So that way, my early days when this orthodoxy of academic thinking was there, people say no experiments at all in your PhD thesis. I will say no experiments. See, my strength is in theoretical modeling and numerical modeling, and that is what I will work on. So there is no need to have an experiment. So for quite some time I had this problem.
Right.
Even very recently, some of the younger colleagues came and reported to me, this is what they are asking, sir. I said, don't worry, you gave the same reply. Yeah, please go on.
In fact, as I was saying, the point to highlight was that you used to happily share your knowledge, your insight, your discussions with almost anybody, which we were seeing all the time. Take any of our.
In fact, that is, in fact, I was into this culture from my student days in IIT Kanpur. So, IIT Kanpur had an excellent computing facility. In fact, I used to criticize our computing facilities in those days. It is no match to that in many respects. And when we go to the computer center as a group, we used to work on, in fact, we took a course on numerical analysis. It was a compulsory course for all PhD students. And we did 14 computer
courses.
Not courses, exercises. You have to develop a code and then solve an example and submit it. So you can see the kind of strength you will get if you take it seriously.
Absolutely.
That is the one which really gave us an inherent strength. And while doing that, we will always discuss with our fellow students what problem he is working, what errors he got in his thing. So that mutual exchange and sharing of the experience was ingrained in me even as a student.
Right.
So it came in handy. So whenever somebody, some PhD student has a problem or faculty has a problem, they will come and discuss with me. I'll, in fact, very often I say that I may not be in your field, but then the very fact that you discuss it with somebody else will probably tell you where you have gone wrong. So I used to give a patient hearing. Sometimes I learned from their experience. So that has been one of the good experiences I have been having in ocean engineering.
I would put it that you were a beautiful example of how to share knowledge, because when you share knowledge, you are not just giving, but you are also getting, as
that's
you were
right.
just saying.
It's mutual.
And
it's mutual.
for me, that has been an example in my mind all the time, which is what I have also tried to do in my.
But I have never been very protective of even the codes I have developed. I have always allowed people to use it, even without acknowledgement. People have used it. In fact, I am happy that somebody is able to use it, and I am able to see the strengths and weaknesses of the code that I have developed, and I can improve on that basically. So that's the kind of thing
that requires a great courage, to be able to say, try working, then let's see if there is any flaw and we grow better out of it. Rather than thinking that this is my code, I cannot share. Because why I say this is, it often happens in the academic intellectual community, that many people take a disproportionate sense of possession of what they have. And
unfortunately, I used to criticize our colleagues that we are unnecessarily very possessive. I mean, at least in the field of knowledge, you need not be. But that has been the, I mean, I don't know, by training or by nature, many people have exhibited that kind of a possessiveness, which is not good actually.
Which
in
an
academic
is not
institution.
The true side of knowledge. Because knowledge brings humility, and you are a good personification of that. Which I would like to put here. Because it's a
coming to these projects, I probably would like to say a few things about the projects I have done. In fact, I have done a very modest number of projects only. Unlike some of the colleagues who have been very, very active, including you, in doing projects in the ocean department. I have done very modest number of projects, and fortunately, this has been only for ISRO and the DRDO. These are two major agencies for which we have worked. And ISRO, I already mentioned about the PSLV thing. We worked for about 5-6 years. although they were meant to be consultancy projects, they were actually research projects because they were spread over 5 years. So, that was one successful project where we are happy to see that it is being used, and you see things flying. In fact, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, there was actually one PSLV flight. The trajectory was oriented towards Chennai, and as I was going home around 4:30 in the evening, I actually saw the thing. I was reminded of Nambinarayanan at that time. Until then, I never had a chance to point to the skies. So that was a good thing. And then the next one was in the early 90s. I think when Professor Ravindhan was the head of the department, I was abroad with my family in Canada, Toronto, Canada. I was not here. And Dr. Kalam, who was the director of DRDO and then RCI, he was the chief guest. And he talked to Professor Ravindhan. He said, is there anybody who has worked with underwater things and all that? He mentioned my name because I did a project earlier to, in fact, I was working with the Prithvi missile project, a short project with them. So, I had some association with DRDO. So, he mentioned about my name and Professor Ravindran. He said, why don't you visit, all of you visit me in RCI Imrat, which is adjacent to DRDO. We have something very important in mind. So, we went there. I think it was probably a Saturday, I remember that. So, the office looked very deserted. So, he said that we are now embarking on an underwater missile project. It is a classified secret project, and we want you to work with us and then fill up. Now, DRDO is doing, and they are only air missile group, and they know nothing about underwater. So, we want you to help us. We said yes, and then immediately said, in fact, he immediately typed out the offer letter to us. And he read it, and he found there was a spelling error. He went in, he himself typed it, corrected and typed it, and gave it to us. And he instructed one Kukilia was there, he is no more, who was the project manager at that time of this particular project. He immediately said that take them to the launch site in Balasur now itself, and then let them stay overnight, look at the facilities. So, we did that. We flew to Nagpur, and then from there by road we went there, stayed overnight, looked at all the facilities there, and then came back. That is Professor Ravindran, myself, and Professor Chandy. And then we were on it. And in fact, for over 2 decades we worked on that problem, the various aspects of it, the hydrodynamics, data analysis, the stability, all that, And they were constantly posing as a problem, and we have been working on it. I mean, for administrative purpose, it was probably divided into many projects, but it was a continuous one. We worked for almost for 20 years. And that was an excellent experience for us. And then, in fact, they were very happy, and they gave to this team consisting of Professor Chandy, myself, and Professor Bhattacharya. In the year 2011, they gave an award called the Academy Excellence Award. That was probably the second year that was instituted. And they were very happy with this collaboration. And that I would say, in fact, now it was much later, it was made public. The government acknowledged that we have an underwater missile project which will be launched from submarines, particularly the nuclear launch submarine. But at that time, it was just having a code called a K-15.
I see.
And that's what we are working on. And that, I mean, matured into a real this thing. So, that was in fact a very I mean, satisfying experience. I mean, at least you can say. In fact, when I left USA, only the Indian friends used to ask me, you are going back to India, leaving this career here? I said yes. And now, once in a while, I hear some people used to say, when I tell him during this discussion, I came back from USA after 4 years of stay, why did you come back? So, I used to tell them, you see the kind of projects I am now working on, the PSLV and the underwater missile. So, it gives me great satisfaction. So, maybe if I had remained there, I probably would have published many more papers. Definitely, I would not have this kind of a satisfying experience. So, that way I would say that that is the another long-term project in which we made enduring contributions, and
it was recognized by
recognized. It was recognized, but we probably would not have bothered about that. I mean, if there was no recognition, we would not have bothered. The fact that something is flowing, I mean flying, was recognition enough for at least for me. I would say.
I know that.
I mean, what you said is correct, because around that time, that is probably in the early 2010 or something like that. No? I used to see some emails floating around among our younger colleagues. That agencies like DRDO is getting a lot of help from us and never acknowledges us. So you better be careful and all that.
Okay.
I always thought it was misplaced. The satisfaction you get is what you have developed, and then you see it being used basically. You know. The next project,
No, I just wanted to emphasize, because it's so important, because in India, as I have seen it, our level of self-confidence is sometimes in question. We need the other person from outside the country to be to tell you, oh, you have done good work. So the recognition never comes from within till somebody else outside tells you.
And now there is a new culture.
They have changed that. And it's important, and I think these two works you have talked of, the sloshing dynamics, spacecraft related and missile program related. See, it's a beautiful way of developing our own confidence. So I think this message should go through this interview, that we need to build up that self-belief and self-confidence, while still being rooted with humility and being open to questions. I say this because I feel I see all these qualities in you. This is not to put a word of praise, but to say that this is so important for the scientific temperament, not to hide things, and also to be able to be open to questions and to have the willingness to exchange and help others. Yes, wonderful.
The two more projects I'll just mention before we go on to other points. The third project we handled, it's not chronologically ordered, the so-called tow transmitter body for the NPOL. They want to tow a body underneath, it's about 1 meter long.
The towed array?
That will have a, array was not in our purview, it is the towed body, it will send out sonar signals, it will bounce on a target, and the array behind will pick it up. So they are developing that.
For detection.
And it was a unique project in the sense, they just gave the size of the body, and they said that you develop everything, the hydrodynamics of it, the structural analysis, design, and fabrication. In fact, we are at the end of the project, we have to deliver them the body. So in that sense, it was a total project, and again we as a team, Professor Chandy, myself, and Professor Bhattacharya worked on it. We did a lot of hydrodynamic model testing and structural analysis, and then design. We engaged an outsider to do the mechanical design, and the team did the fabrication using titanium. That's what they wanted, and then it was delivered to them. Again, it was stretched out to about 3-4 years, and it was successfully towed. In fact, it was towed in a project called Nagan. And even now I look back, whenever I visit NPOL, and then in a big group, some higher up or this thing, when I am introduced, they will say they are the ones who did that Nagan body. So that kind of recognition was there. I mean, that was fully satisfying, that you have done something which is working. Of course, now they are on to a bigger body, and then they are trying to make it work. So this is another thing. And in the year 2010, when I started my career as a emeritus faculty, interestingly, the ISRO came back to us again. They said we are working on the so-called human space program. At the time, it was called like that, because the government has not formally approved a project on that, but they are developing in-house technologies, different components of technology. That is how they work. They first explore the different technologies and in-house projects. They get approval and then do that, and then finally an entire mission is put together. It is only recently, as you must have seen, the Prime Minister set a target that in 2020 you should fly this thing, and this was called, what is that called? Gaganyaan. Gaganyaan mission, where they will put a human in the space. An important component of that is a capsule. Capsule in which 2 astronauts will fly and go into orbit. And I also wanted to test the impact dynamics of that and the hydrostatics of that.
The re-entry.
Re-entry. I mean, it will come, and in fact, they were working on the American concept. This is a conical shell, And the American concept is that it will be parachuted and it will come and impact on the, unlike the Russians where it will land on earth,
desert
this will land on water. So they wanted to study the impact dynamics on water. We said, okay, we will do that, and we did a scale model of that. We did impact tests in our basin. And then I developed, in fact at that time they also wanted to test the hydrodynamics of it. When this is floating and exposed to wave, they wanted to find out whether it will topple. They want to put some buoyancy spheres, whether it will topple and go down, or how long it will remain there until a rescue team goes and picks them up. So at the time I had two choices. One choice is to buy an expensive software to do hydrostatic analysis. At the time ocean engineering field there were some softwares available. Probably 7-8 lakhs if we bought it, or if they bought it, it would have been much more expensive. But then I said that I'll simply develop a code from first principles. So I developed a code for hydrostatic stability, and then I attached this spherical modules, and then we were testing. We just plotted the entire, calculated the entire writing moment versus inclination angle, and then pinpointed the hydrostatic stability characters of that. So these two things were done and then handed over to them. So they were happy, at least the hydrostatics part. I don't know, they may be buying a software and doing it, but we made a simple in-house software, and then we handed over to that. So that was probably the last project I handled in my career, and then my stint as the emeritus professor ended in 2015. And then I was formally retired, so to say. And I still continue, of course.
You would not retire, you must be still working.
I still continue. There is one PhD student working in acoustics, and then waveguide acoustics, of course. And then I also spent some time with the NIOT group.
In fact, that's what I wanted to also.
In addition to being in the review meetings, this is an actual hands-on work. In fact, I am a person who believes in working with my own hands. Whatever problem I take, I would like to make a model and then implement it. Unfortunately, now that skill is lost, because people develop skills in developing, in using canned programs. I don't have any complaint on that, but as long as you use it wisely and intelligently, that is fine, because you cannot develop a codes like that now. So when codes are there, you should do that. But then I am bred in that tradition, because when you are students, there are no codes available, so you have to develop learn a numerical technique, develop a numerical model, code it, debug it, and then test it. So I was bred in that tradition. I am still doing that, and then that's what I am doing even for NIOT. I am making small codes so that they can do that. Then I told them that I will tell you how to use the canned programs using this as an input. So that's basically what I'm doing. So I'm still continuing that. I'm happy about that. I'm still able to, healthy enough to continue that work.
I think it's also very fundamentally important, because the moment we lean on somebody, then we are going to pay a heavy price. One is our own development will stop, because we will depend on that. The second is these black boxes will never tell you what are the limitations in them. So unless they come out with a better version, when they will say this is better than the old version.
No, limitations can be appreciated if you gain the expertise. But to some extent, in fact, I always say this, the package programs give you an excellent opportunity to become an expert. In fact, that is how I learned a lot of finite element modeling. You can experiment your thoughts and then numerical models using a program that is already available. It also, the other flip side of it, that it also makes you lazy. If you know how to prepare the data, you will get your results and then pull on in your life. So these are two sides of that, and perhaps people should use the other side of it. No, then you become really expert.
Definitely, there is no doubt about that.
You learn the basics and then look at the code and then what it does. Just go into the. In fact, I always tell them, whenever you want to use a code, read the theory manual first. And the references that are given in that theory manual, that is how you become an expert in that code. Not just by making a data and then getting a result out of that.
Absolutely. I wanted to get on to some other things. That is, you are talking of your interactions with NIOT. You have perhaps handled some projects for them also in the course of development.
Basically, in the field of acoustics, Professor Bhattacharya was the major thing in that. But I have been mainly reviewing things for them actually. I was also chairing their acoustics group and then reviewing projects. And now, of course, in my hands-on capability, I am helping their deporter, I think, as it is. Okay. But then my interaction with them has been very heavy. In fact, some of the senior people there, I've been in their recruitment interviews. Yep. So that way I have a long-standing this thing.
Right.
And in appreciation of that, they also given an award in the year 2015.
Okay.
The Ministry of Earth Sciences, they gave an award, that is the Outstanding Ocean Scientist of the Year award.
Right.
I think Professor Ramidhan was the brain behind that.
Yeah.
So they gave an award to recognize that as it is.
Yeah.
So I continue to interact with them because they are very receptive. So I'm happy as long as you make me feel wanted, I am willing to give my knowledge and expertise, irrespective of the rewards, and I am doing that still actually.
I have. Let us talk of some of the things you have done at IIT Madras besides the teaching and research and projects.
Okay, what they call as the corporate life.
Corporate life, because you were drawn into it as.
Because of the formal procedure, I became the head in the year 1997, I guess.
Yes.
I would say candidly that that was very uneventful. There is nothing much for me to do, except that we are focusing on maintaining our test facilities, excellent test facilities that we have had.
Yeah.
And when it was over sometime in year 2000, 3 years stint, and I don't know, it was a very strange thing. Professor Natarajan was the director at the time. He called me. I don't know who gave him that advice. I was known as an academic entity rather than a corporate entity, and a little bit candid in some meetings, of course.
Yeah.
And everywhere I stress the need for basic research and then support for that and all that. For some odd reason, I don't know who gave him the advice. He called me and said, would you like to take up the chairmanship of the Estate and Works Committee?
Yeah.
For some reason, again, I didn't think twice. I said yes.
Good. Yeah.
Although I would have repented that in a lighter vein, as I went along. That was a 2-year thing.
Yeah.
But I would say that I enjoyed it in the sense that I am basically a civil engineering graduate. So the civil engineer in me has come out, I think, when I was sitting there.
Right.
I was able to appreciate what they are doing and then correct them as it is. And Professor Natarajan was very, very supportive.
Right.
That was the period when we took up large projects in terms of renovating the buildings, both in the institute, in the institute, the quarters, as well as the hostel side.
Yeah.
So I was a part of that. That was a hectic task, handling a lot of contracts. I also brought in computerization of the design office there. We brought in, we bought design projects, design software, and then we also had
the transition
bought
from the
some
manual
computer.
drafting.
Yeah, so I initiated that, and we also inducted quite a few people into that.
Right.
There is a dearth of this thing, and Professor Natarajan was very insistent that our campus requires a cleaning. It has never been done. So I took it very seriously, and then there was a French company called Onyx. They got the contract, and then they did the cleaning of this one. In fact, I used to say with pride that I walked in almost every dirty corner of this campus, along with the representative from Onyx, to point him what the cleaning he should do, because they always charged by the weight. Yeah. He will collect the trash and then they weigh it, and then IIT has to pay per ton a few thousand rupees. So I did that. I took it very seriously, and a lot of people probably knew about me, the campus people. Mainly because they would have seen me in the hostel sector, everywhere. In the shopping center, I'll go to the dirtiest part and say, remove all this dirt and then clean it up. I did that. I also took up this lack of serious water supply infrastructure, and in fact, we suffered and lived through that. In fact, during my stint as the chairman, we had one of the worst water shortages. We went through really, in fact, some of the people still remember the kind of things we have done in those days. And also our sewage treatment. That was also very dismal.
I remember you took the steps of deepening the lake.
Yeah, at that time, because of water shortage.
A supplementary artificial lake.
No, we had an oxidation pond for namesake. Nobody ever bothered about that. There's an open channel that will lead from the campus to the Buckingham Canal via the tidal park. It was an open channel which was not kept, and of course near the tidal park it was underground. And this oxidation pond was terribly outsized because our campus size population has increased quite a lot. So, as a civil engineer, I thought we have to focus on that. So, I convinced Professor Natarajan to give funding. So, we built two large sums, one in the institute area, one in the thing. Then we convinced the alumni to fund one of the overhead tanks near Mandakini.
Right.
And more importantly, we have simply closed that oxidation pond, instead dug up two bigger ponds. And then we also put entirely underground some 1 or 2 meter pipes, 1.5 meter I think pipes, all the way from the edge of our campus to the edge of the tidal park, to carry this effluent of that. And after that, I think people in the environmental engineering, they have taken that, and then they have put new treatment plants and all that, more modern treatment plants and all that. In fact, I look back, even when I happen to meet any of the engineers in the engineering unit, I make it a point to ask them,
how is it doing?
How is it doing? What improvements you have made? And similarly, in the water supply side, apart from this, I used to ask them, what kind of chlorination do you do? They said, we use chlorine gas, and then if you may recall that once there was an accident, and then even Vanavani school was closed because it was close by where they are doing this thing. I said, it is a foolish thing that we have been doing. Nobody ever bothered, basically. It is a foolish thing that we have been doing. And then there is what is called hypochlorite solution, which is about 5% or 7%, and that is what is usually used. And then they have switched over to that, and they have installed a plant which will inject this hypochlorite solution, and I assume that they continue to do that. So these are some of the things which I took out of my own interest, but then I convinced Professor Natarajan to fund that. And then he had again like cleaning the campus, he had the initiative to start the survey of the campus. In fact, many of you must have seen those nice color huge maps at the road thing. So this survey was done during that period. And we engaged a company in Bangalore. They did a modern computerized survey, and then they did this, and then they handed over that data, and then now they put that in that map in the digital form, and then that continues to be used as it is. So that also happened during that period. So that way there is a wholesome, you can say, in addition to renovation, we also modernized many of these things. So that is being continued now, actually.
In fact, I remember because I was the warden of Alak, and you gave me unstinted support in doing many things there. You know,
that's right.
Those days putting wonderful flooring for the mess room, etc.
That's right.
Not done yet, but you gave me solid support, we could execute.
So that way this 2 years as a estate chairman was a total this thing on my drag on my academic career. I actually did nothing because most of the time I used to spend there. But then at the end of it, I said, okay, this 2 years is well spent. I can always now revive my academic career, it's no problem. But then I did something that is worthwhile, and I can look back even now. You can see the imprints of that.
You have a lasting imprint in the whole campus.
And then people have continued on that. So in that sense, I would say that that was a 2 year well spent, although it was non-academic, and then in fact, immediately after that career, fortunately, Professor Anant did not think of extending that. I don't know what I would have said. And my wife said that at the end of that, no more corporate assignments. By that time, I had to move out of campus because my wife left her job here. So I was commuting every day towards the end of my chairmanship. And one day when I was driving, when I was near the Mount Road thing, Professor Anand called me in the midst of a Dean's Committee meeting and said, there is a proposal that we offer you Dean Administration.
And you refused.
And immediately I said, no, because what my wife said was fresh in my mind. So I was conscious enough to say no, and then fortunately that was not revived, so to say.
I just wanted to put it on record again, because if you remember the club, staff club, when I was also the president.
Yes, you did a nice shed.
You gave me wonderful support.
I wish that they had continued, and then that has been alive. But for some reason that
made a nice little kiosk there. And
in fact, during my time, there was also a strong proposal to demolish that shopping center old shed and then do that. At the time, I think the funding portion, things like that, people deferred it, and eventually
it was
I am glad to see that it has been
beautifully.
done eventually.
Yes, that is true. So that's wonderful. And I just wanted to touch upon one last thing there. Let us come to the, you have seen a generation, next generation of faculty, younger elements.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that to summarize this entire stint of year 1980 to 2015.
Yeah.
Initially, it was started with core faculty drawn from mostly civil background, and fortunately, in 1982, you were part of the Naval Architecture group with civil engineering at the time.
We had a very lively
Fortunately, in 1982, it has been annexed or amalgamated with the
engineering.
I think that was a wise thing. So we became richer by that experience, I would say.
Yeah.
The knowledge of naval architecture came to ocean engineering. And then the next generation of faculty started coming in, because they were faculty who have been trained in ocean engineering itself, either PhD or a postdoctoral work.
Right.
So that has been a good break from the past. So that was a positive thing, and in fact I see them, most of them doing very well, extremely well, and that tradition is continuing. And fortunately, Professor Anantha started a tradition that he will do recruitment frequently, and that is being continued now. So that we were able to get a fresh young talent into our thing, and also they had this contract appointments. So I would say that this recruitment process has really renovated our faculty thing. What started as a core old timers who will be trained in ocean engineering. For example, I would say that I am trained in ocean. I learned ocean engineering on the job. In fact, I used to joke sometimes. IIT has been paying me the professor salary for someone who has been only learning on the job. In fact, I would say that the best thing I enjoyed in my career is learning. That has been a continuous process for me. Even today, I do that. So that way, most of the people earlier were learning on the job, but then maybe beyond 1990, we started recruiting faculty who were actually trained in hardcore ocean engineering, and then that has been the greatest strength, I would say, that has happened to our department.
But talking of a teacher learning, I think it's a very honest statement if you say that a good teacher has to be a good learner all the time.
That's right. It's very, very important. Otherwise, you get outdated in no time.
Not only that, if you start believing that you know everything, then you stop learning.
That's right.
So I would say the ability to say I don't know is a very important thing. This is what I tell my students. I do hope you agree with that philosophy.
Yes. In fact, I might have said I did not know in my early part of the career. At least when I came back after the lecture, I would recall, yes, I did not know this. So in the next class, I will definitely go back and tell them that.
You get better, and that's
we do that in
important.
fact.
Would you like to, I know you wouldn't want to give a word of advice, would you like to give a word of advice to young faculty from all your experience?
No, basically what I used to tell any faculty, if you think that you have strength in a particular discipline, you continue in that one, because do what you do best, but then do things that have a high degree of difficulty. That will give you the maximum satisfaction. Do not worry about take criticism stoically, and then you continue. If you do very good work of high degree of difficulty, it certainly will bring fruits. So don't worry about that. And of the new crop of people who are using all these canned softwares, you cannot escape that, because that brings in the wisdom and the hard work of a huge number of experts basically. So use them, because that is the best way to use them for field problems. But then become an expert in using them, and not merely a user. That is another advice that I would like to give to the youngsters. Yes, it is. So that way you can, when a new version comes in, you can really appreciate what is the difference, and in what sense it is a better code than what you already been using. These are probably two advices I used to always give the youngsters. So I would like to reinforce that.
I think that's very important.
Idea.
I absolutely agree with that. There is one more thing which I wanted to touch upon, which I left out earlier. Your stint with the Naval Research Board as chairman of the hydrodynamics panel.
In fact, I remember in our work with DRDO, I remember that in one of the review meetings in DRDO, conducted in DRDO, Dr. Kalam simply walked in, and then he said that he was a very informal man. He said that we want to set up a center of excellence which will do hydrodynamic research, because DRDO is going to develop more and more these underwater missiles, and we want to learn underwater technology and develop it. And after coming back, Professor Bhattacharya and I put together a small document where we can set up a center in the Washington Center, Center of Excellence, and the funding requirement and things like that. And it was probably lying with the government for some time. And a couple of years later, maybe at the initiative of Dr. Kalam himself, the government came with a proposal to set up this. I remember when Dr. Siddharth discussed that in the IC Indasa building, in the new NIOT that has just started. It started here. So he spelled out the goals and then the panels they are embarking on and things like that. And Professor Ravindran has become the head of the so-called hydrodynamics panel.
Right.
And I was a panel member at that time as it is. And then when he eventually relinquished that and became a chairman of the board, I became the panel head, and then I had the opportunity for about 6 years or 7 years.
Yes.
I was managing that, and then reviewing new projects, and then reviewing project progress. So that has been again a great learning experience, I would say.
Yeah, I would like to ask one question with reference to that, because you always had the philosophy, correct me if I am wrong, that research should be open-ended.
Yeah, in fact, it's not just my philosophy. The Dr. Siddharth, when he spelled out this, if you go back and read the Naval Board research document objectives, it always says that it should be open-ended, it should be high-end, it should not have any immediate application, it should have only long-term application. All these are spelled out. Although now there are forces which are pulling it away, but this is what has been spelled out there. And we often, whenever I recommend a project, the people sitting there try to cut it short, and then I recollect and then reinforce that goal, and then we always encourage this open-ended, high degree of difficulty projects as it is.
Yeah, because as you said, now there is a slight change in that thinking, that they want it also to be application-oriented. So my interpretation is the difference between science and technology.
That's right, yeah.
Because you need to have the technology for which you need the science to understand. Yeah. So I would then say that don't we need to guide NRB?
But I think the members, in fact, if you remember, a new panel was started in the field of hydroacoustics, hydro and vibroacoustics. Yeah. So in fact, I took that initiative a few years ago. But the main support came from Dr. Bhujangarao. He was the director of NSTL, and then eventually became Director General of Naval Systems. So he always sits in the board meetings, and in one of the board meetings I made this proposal. That is a very important area and very few people work. And if you have a panel, we can now try to enlarge that. And then he readily supported that, and then I went through about 2 years of exercise, making presentations in different groups, and then I finally submitted that, and it was approved. And eventually Professor Bhattacharya is now the panel head. Of course, I'm also a member there reviewing projects. So I tell him that whenever you attend the meeting, please look at this tendency of the people to pull you back to purely application-oriented projects. And then tell about this thing. Maybe they have a point that we have been in existence for several years, so there should be some application. That is fine, but the main goal of open-ended high tech research should never be diluted. You constantly put forth this point, and hopefully we'll continue on at least some few more years with that goal in our mind as it is.
I also want to bring to the viewers another aspect in you. You have a wonderful sense of humor.
Thank you.
Which I have heard from so many very intelligent jokes that would come out. Let me just share one which you will also remember. You know, there was a time when our road had little potholes and whatnot. And of course, the city roads are far more beyond control. So there were, as usual, our IIT colleagues mouthing loudly how to maintain the city roads. So you told me very nicely, We cannot manage our 10 kilometers of road, and we are telling them how to manage the hundreds of kilometers outside. I like that down to earth
even sitting
way
in the engineering unit as a chairman,
yeah.
I always used to criticize those people.
Yeah.
That we have a small campus and a big setup.
With lots of
We
money.
still find so many shortfalls, leakage here, pothole there. That is just not possible. I mean, we lack something somewhere. I used to tell that actually.
So like this, there are so many other jokes I remember, which was always fun, you know, cutting across barriers. And the most important I would like to again record is your absolute down-to-earth humility, the openness, the willingness to interact with anybody at any levels, and absolute gentleman.
Thank you. Maybe I'll close with an anecdote.
Please.
Perhaps it is for maybe two of them for record's sake. You know, early in my career, as I said, my students work only on numerical modeling,
Right.
and we had only the so-called IBM PC XT and AT.
Yeah.
Some of you may remember that. No? Tabletop computers just came in.
Yes.
PCs came in, and we were having only XTs were lower end and ATs were. And even if you have, in fact, we had only one XT in the entire department. It will work all the 24 hours. And my students would do photon coding, large scale photon coding. And they were discussing, MTech students of course.
Yeah.
They were discussing among themselves, hey, does your guide know any coding at all? He is asking to do so many codings. So he was not sure. And in one of our meetings, I mean, since I was open with the students, they never had hesitation to tell this to me. So I said that I have done a lot of coding right from my student days, so that I do a lot of coding. Although I know that some of my students do better coding than me, but I have done a lot of coding, so I told them that. And the very first visit to IIT campus, looking for a job after I came back from USA, I went to the director's office. There was a director secretary, I forget his name. I told him that I would like to meet the director. He said, no, unless you have an appointment, you cannot meet him, and you can't get an appointment in the near future. Then I went out and then took a slip of paper, and then I said, Dr. C.P. Vendhan, postdoctoral fellow, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, USA. I wrote it and then gave it to him. He looked at it, immediately took inside, and he said, wait for some time.
You got your appointment.
I got my appointment.
Because of all your
and then I started my career.
Right.
I don't know whether I would call it as a bluff or to think, but that's what has happened actually.
That's wonderful. Yep. So it's been so nice talking. I think we can conclude at this stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good interactions.
Sure.
You said that in 83 some funding came to the Ocean Engineering Department. I remember 83 Silverjubilee year, the director signed an agreement with Germany for about 6 major projects.
Yeah.
One of the projects was in my field, catalysis.
Okay.
Ocean engineering, material science, and about 3 others. In fact, why I am asking is, I think that was the time when the Germany started funding the ocean engineering.
Yeah, they gave a large chunk of money
Do you remember how much funding was involved?
I don't remember the amount, probably.
Maybe 5 million marks or something, right?
In fact, almost all the test facilities you see there.
5 million marks is what I remember.
Who was the coordinator? Did they make any?
It was, I think, Professor V.S. Raju and Professor Ganapati were the main people who were handling it. We were all working for it, of course. But whatever you see there by waymakers, Flume waymakers and all that, they all came from German funding actually. And
since you are working with oceans, long ago, about 60 years back, looking at an article which appeared in one of the journals, I wrote an article, Chemical Wealth of the Sea. The idea was how do you recover magnesium and bromine from sea?
Okay. That is deep ocean mining, yeah.
Now, does your department have any interaction with the CSIR lab?
No, actually, the NIOT, National Institute of Ocean Technology, has a department working on ocean mining. NIOT, they have done great strides. They have recovered samples, they have a crawler, and some of the colleagues in Ocean department work with them on different aspects of that. Yeah, incidentally, I am now a consultant just for a short while, working with them, and one of the problems I am looking at is pumping of this slurry all the way from the seabed to 5,000 meters up the surface, and I am trying to advise them on who can do that hydrodynamic problem, and also this deep water cables, etc. I am helping them with that, but they are the ones who are doing work. Of course, they have collaboration with the NIO Goa, who have recovered samples, but these are the people who have actually put crawlers on the seabed. Up to about 1,000 meters they have put it. Now they are trying to increase on that. They have done pumping from about 500 meters already. They want to now increase it to about 1,000 meters. They are doing it step by step. They are the ones who are doing hardcore work in this field. Yes, it is.
Professor Indrason joined your department after he retired.
Yeah, he had this soft corner during his term here as a director. He had Professor Rajiv had an excellent rapport with him. He had the soft corner for our department. In fact, he used to visit us frequently. And even after his retirement, he had honorary professor, rather as an appointment as a professor with our department. I would say that it is his blessing that really helped the ocean engineering department or center at that time to get a large chunk of German aid, and then also give priority in many of the things actually.
Full-fledged department. Yeah.
But people like him also had the opportunity to visit under that grant and spend a year in different German universities.
Berlin, yeah.
So the German aid was an inseparable part of the ocean engineering department, I would say.
In fact, I must be thankful to your department in the sense in 1988, I was the organizing chairman of JE, and then I had to hold confidential meetings, and I could not think of coming to this place and hold all the way from that place. So the ocean engineering department, I think Professor Chettiar was the head of the department, and the Richandi, they gave that conference room.
Yeah.
The entire confidential work, we got it done.
Yeah.
No, in fact, I am reminded, since you mentioned about JE, I am reminded of an anecdote. We go there for counseling on behalf of our department, and a couple of times I have been there. And generally, I will be very honest. I would not think I am coming from ocean engineering NIOT. They will come for NIOT, Naval Architecture Counseling. And if somebody has a very good admission in some other good institution like Anna University, etc., I will advise them honestly that I will tell them the pros and cons, and I will advise them that that is a better opportunity. And about, I think in 2007 or 6, one dual degree student who worked with me for his project, on the day he finished his YOC exam on his project, he told me, "Sir, do you remember you advised me on the day of counseling? I and my mother were there. I had EEE admission in Anna University. You advised me seriously to join that. But my mother said I have to be in IIT. The only branch I would get is ocean engineering. I mean naval architecture, and then I am here." So I was really surprised that I never remembered that. But I've been generally very honest. I would not mislead him saying that. I also tell them, if you want an IIT stamp, be here. If you want a good branch, etc., if you are very particular about that, take that, if it is in a good institute.
Can I say that the ocean engineering department, it is a department of, I can say, applied work. Most of the thing is applied work.
Yeah, it is an applied thing. But even there, we have what is called ocean science.
Research and development is the main focus of ocean engineering. You can say it like that.
No, for example, way back in the United States, after the World War, when many experts, scientists moved to USA, like von Karman, Timoshenko, they started a discipline called engineering science.
Yes.
So people are wondering in those days, what is this engineering science? There is science we know, where you do basic research in engineering and technology. So now you do what is called ocean engineering science. So where people do basic work. And then of course you take it one step further and make it into ocean technology and apply it. For example, what NIOT does and what many of our colleagues do, they are all ocean technology. Some do basic science. Perhaps I was in the border between the two, science and technology.
In fact, in the initial stages of the department, the staff were recruited in civil engineering and soil mechanics.
Yes.
They moved finally.
Yeah, soil structures. In fact, I mentioned that it was started the core faculty who were drawn from the civil engineering department, And then it became a full-fledged ocean engineering center, and then later a department eventually. Yes.
Today we have even petroleum engineering.
That's right. Eventually there is a
which is still further from
from that. Yes. Of course, it is moved down to ocean engineering. They call what is called upstream
of petroleum engineering.
I mean, upstream is actually downwards.
I think there was a long time ago, there was a lecturer in geology in
civil engineering, yeah.
Muttaya.
That's right.
And after he left, I think the geology shifted to ocean engineering only.
No, even before that, Professor S.P. Subramanian with a geology background moved, and then he started working on marine sediments and all that. And these people have been managing, I think, without him, and I don't know, I mean, making a lot of arrangements. I do not know how they've been managing that. But we did have a person with a geology background, but focusing on marine geology, sediments and things like that. And also, in fact, he's the one who has put together a report on ocean mining. There's nodules on the seabed. He has put together a report, actually.
Now, why I mentioned about magnesium was that one of the compounds that you can derive from this magnesium is pillar clay. It is actually magnesium, aluminum, and some carbonate and all. And this particular compound is used in Germany. They sell it in the name of the mineral itself. It is called hydrotalcite. It's an anionic clay. And in fact, another thing is, using this, the Central Salt and Mineral Chemical Institute in Bhavnagar have tried to produce biodiesel. Biodiesel, they have used quite a lot of catalyst, but this is one of the catalysts that has been used.
No, but you must have heard recent years about the marine hydrates, gas hydrates, no? Yeah. So NIOT has a small activity on that, but in the ocean department we have young colleagues who are doing a lot of research in marine hydrates. So you can probably meet them if you are interested, actually.
Okay, sorry for interfering.
No, thank you.